Welcome to Bunch of Apes podcast. I'm your host, Sam Harris, and I'm just here really for a quick short episode to kind of relaunch the podcast. Bunch of Apes has been around for a couple of years. Initially, the podcast was launched with no real clear direction other than to speak to people that I was kind of interested in and wanted to talk to. But I've kind of come back to it now with a bit more of a goal. And I want to make the podcast focus solely on the subject of human prehistory. It's a subject that I'm a complete layman in. I have no education or qualifications in that area other than a sort of passion and a bit of an obsession about the topic. But from now on, all the Bunch of Apes episodes will be either around the subject of human prehistory, if I feel brave enough to do anything on my own, feel like I've studied and researched enough not to come across as a complete know-nothing. But for the most part, I'll be using it as an excuse to get on guests with lots more knowledge, experience, and background in that area than me. A couple of reasons for that. Again, I'm really interested in the topic of human prehistory. That interest, though, came to me quite late in life when I already had a job, already had a career, and already had fairly limited time to engage in any sort of structured educational qualifications in that area. You know, to be honest, looking back, I binned off history as soon as it became an option at school. But that's always, I've kind of thought back on that now, and it's always annoyed me a little bit that, you know, the education system is kind of set up to shape what historical content you look at. You know, I remember when the last time I did history at school, it was all King Henry VIII's wives and Anderson bomb shelters from the Second World War, neither of which really interested me at all. So here I am at, you know, pushing 40. I'll leave you to decide how close to 40 I am. But yeah, pushing 40 with this sort of passion and interest, but without really the time to dedicate to sort of studying and going down an academic field in that area, whether that's paleoanthropology, archaeology, all those kind of options that would be available for someone who's interested in human prehistory. So with that in mind, I wanted to use this podcast to get on fantastic guests, get people with loads of knowledge, experience in that area, and learn through them, through the conversations that we have. Again, you know, for me, my academic journey was a bit fraught. I didn't really do too well with any of my school life, really, or university, to be honest. So for me, I always learn better through people, you know, having conversations, being able to talk to people, and, you know, supplement that with obviously reading all the kind of popular books out there around the subject of human prehistory. So yeah, so for those of you that have either tuned into Bunch of Apes before, you might be a bit disappointed if you're hoping for guests that we've had on in the past, or, you know, I mean, I've had lots of people in the past. I've had international rugby players, ex-MMA pros, jiu-jitsu professionals, barbecue expert, loads of people, really. It's been fantastic to talk to. But like I said, I want to kind of refocus it and make it on one particular topic or area. So if you're new to Bunch of Apes and you're interested in the topic of human prehistory, you're in the right place, okay? So you can go back and listen to some of the old episodes if you like. We have had lots of guests. James Dilley, Dr. James Dilley now, who is an experimental archaeologist, I've had on lots of times in the past. He will be back on under the new guise of the, you know, the Bunch of Apes, a layman's journey into human prehistory. So he'll be back on again in the coming weeks. But he has been on in the past, so you can go back and listen to those. Brianna Pobiner, who also is going to come back on for our relaunch episode. She was previously on the podcast talking about the human diet. So, you know, there are still old episodes you might want to explore, but if not, then just subscribe, tune in, keep listening for more fantastic guests in the area of human prehistory. And one day, maybe we'll be able to get Alice Roberts on here which I've been trying in the past, but she's been fairly hesitant, or her publicity team have. And I sent her some of the old episodes to listen to, and her publicity team didn't really reply after that. So, you know, who knows what she made of that. But we already have, I think, 3 episodes in the bag. So again, Brianna Pobner is going to be back talking about sort of early hominins, Homo erectus in particular, some more insight into early human diet and what implications that has on, I guess, our ideas around today's diets. James Dilly's back talking about what he's been up to with his fantastic online shop for all things ancient. Well, not all things ancient, but, you know, where he will provide you with replicas of Stone Age items. I've got a big Christmas list that I sent my mum from Ancient Craft. So he'll be talking about that, and also giving some insight into how he got into flint knapping at such a young age. And then we have Bernie Taylor, who has some really interesting ideas and thoughts around, I guess, the earliest stories about the hero's journey that may have been being told through cave art as far back as kind of thought 30, 40,000 years ago. And that was a really interesting conversation. I really enjoyed that one. So those are the 3 that we've got in the bag. And we've also got plenty more lined up for the coming months ahead. So it's an exciting time for me. I'm, you know, really interested in this subject. So again, if no one listens, at the very least, I'm going to get to learn something. But hopefully along the way, we can make it entertaining and accessible for, again, anyone really, because I'm going to need to understand it. So I'm going to have to kind of understand it and break it down into terms that work in my head. So hopefully that will be useful to someone who hasn't perhaps got any academic background in this area. So that's kind of the premise of the podcast, really. I've got some knowledge of human prehistory, but one of the things that fascinates me the most about sort of human prehistoric ideas, information, is actually how sparse some of the information is. You know, we sometimes assume that what we're told is, I guess, fact because it comes from scientists, from experts. But the more you speak to those experts, the more they're sort of upfront and honest about how little we do actually know. You know, sometimes we'll be basing our ideas around a particular early hominin, such as maybe Homo erectus or Homo ergaster, on a few skeletal finds and maybe not even complete skeletons. So, you know, the information, we have to fill in lots of the gaps, and you never know when something else is going to come out to kind of change the whole paradigm of information that we have. You know, for example, I think a couple of years back when I was speaking to a few people in this area, the sort of general consensus was that Homo sapiens were had left Africa around, I think, 200,000 years ago, but they've recently found a jawbone in an Israeli cave that they can date back to 350,000 years ago of a Homo sapiens. So that's kind of been pushed back even further. But again, sometimes when you're dating a skeleton, that's not an exact science. So I'm going to be learning more about how they actually come to those conclusions as well. So yeah, I'm really excited about it. I don't want to go on too long with just me because I haven't got much information to share. It's just to kind of tell you what the podcast is going to be about from now on. But do go back and listen to the old episodes if you like. And if you want to give us some feedback or suggest any guests, or if you would like to come on as a guest and talk about your sort of area of expertise, then the email address is bunchofapes@gmail.com. And you can catch us on SoundCloud or iTunes. There's also a YouTube channel where we're going to be uploading these videos. So I'm recording this as a video, as if anyone wants to see my ugly mug, but at least it makes it a bit more of a visual experience. You also might, if you're watching this on a video, you might be able to twig why I might be so interested in human prehistory, because, you know, these eyebrows, they keep the rain out of my eyes when it rains. I was watching a program on Neanderthals once. It was one of those Alice Robert ones where they kind of put together what a Neanderthal might look like from old skeletal finds, and they put sort of skin on top of it and clothing and reconstructed the face. And my wife kept doing bloody double takes. So, and as it turns out, when I looked into that area, so I did a DNA test, and then I kind of ran my results through an ancient calculator that you can get online. I don't know how accurate these things are. In fact, that might be a topic to explore, because since then, I've read some stuff on DNA tests that make me think they're all a bit of a con and a rip-off, but there you go. But I did run it through that calculator, and it came out that I had about 3 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, which I thought is not very much. You know, apparently we've all got some. Particularly if you're of European descent, you're likely to have some small amount of Neanderthal DNA. So I thought 3 to 4%. That's not very much of anything, is it? Turns out that's very much towards the higher end of the scale. Okay, and when I questioned my mother about it, she was very, very cagey. My dad just grunted at me through a spear. So okay, but yeah, so you might be able to see why the connection with cavemen is strong. But again, it's, for me, it's more about. So another fascinating thing. I'm going to freestyle a bit about my own kind of interest in the area. But if you're already finding my mumblings boring, then do please tune into the later episodes where we've got some real experts in there. But another thing that I find really interesting. So for my role, for my job, I work a lot with people with neurodiversity and differences in the brain. So I've done some of my own study around sort of neurological development. And one of the things that is really interesting to me is, as far as I'm aware, the Homo sapiens, 300 odd thousand years ago, when we first have sort of remains to study, the brain shape, the brain size, the brain structure is likely to have been identical to what it is today. Now, again, if someone has information to change that idea, please send it to me. This is a learning exercise. I'm not claiming to be an expert. This is just based on certain books that I've read and what I can remember. So the idea being that all those hundreds of thousands of years ago, we basically had the same brain. But yet you don't start to see evidence for things like artistic expression until maybe 70,000 years ago. And then cave paintings, I think the earliest one is about 70,000, 30, 40,000 years ago. Yes, we had sort of early use of tools all those hundreds of thousands of years ago, but they really kind of developed in sophistication again around that sort of 70 to 40,000 years ago mark. In fact, I think it's called the cognitive revolution in some circles. In the book that I was reading, it was. So the idea is there's almost this like leap of cognitive development in that area, unless, of course, we just haven't found stuff from further back in time that would show us that actually Homo sapiens were doing those kind of things way before when we first thought. And then, of course, you've got, agricultural revolutions happening, what is it, 12, 15,000 years ago. So there's a whole gap of human existence. And I don't just mean humans as in hominins, as in, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, all those early hominins, but actual Homo sapiens, pretty much the same as us for hundreds of thousands of years. What were they doing? What were they thinking? What was their culture like? How were they communicating? Were they using language? I think it's unlikely to assume that they weren't. But again, recorded written language, not until sort of ancient Babylonian times. So there's so much about being human that we just don't know, and I don't think we understand, and I certainly don't feel like I understand enough. And given the current climate and how much debate and difference there is about what it is to be a person, what that means in today's world, and what our identity is as a species, I just think it's such a fascinating topic to go back and think about. And the other side of that is going back to my Neanderthal roots, if you like. Obviously, there was interspecies breeding. So what were those species like? Again, Homo erectus, all those Homo erectus is a fascinating species, and I spoke to Brianna Hobener quite a lot about that. In the next episode, you'll be able to hear about that. But they were around for, I think about 1.5 million years, and they started off in Africa, but they were one of the only, I think maybe the only other species to leave Africa and migrate all the way across the world to sort of China. But again, if you study the skeletons and you look at the sort of brain size and the likely sort of cognitive functioning, what would they have been like? Because again, they had much smaller brains, much more basic tool use, much less, well, no evidence for things like artistic expression and abstract thinking. So what were they like? How did they get all the way across to the other side of the world? Are they just, I'm an ex-rugby player, so I can, I've played with people that I think probably would remind me of what maybe a Homo erectus would be thinking like, prop forwards, for example. But yeah, what were they like? And then, you've got the Neanderthals who, we think there was a common ancestor, Homo heidelbergensis, which perhaps split or, was the ancestor of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. So we had a very close connection. What was that interaction like? Again, if you go back and listen to some of the nonsense that I talked with James Dilley a couple of years back and made him feel very uncomfortable about, I tried to get him engaged in this whole kind of romantic story of a Neanderthal lady and him as a sort of Homo sapien hunter-gatherer and star-crossed lovers type of nonsense. And yeah, he doesn't like to talk about that on the new episode we recorded. He pretty much flat out refused to talk about that. And I don't blame him, to be honest. And I am trying to make the podcast a bit more educational. So, perhaps we won't go down those kind of fantasy stories. But yeah, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? What was that like? What was it like to see a species really close to us, but not us? I'm fascinated with apes. Most people are, aren't they? Most people like to watch apes at the zoo, and find there's loads of programs on chimps, and always fascinating. And when you ask most people why they're interested in apes and chimpanzees, everyone usually says, well, they're a bit like us, aren't they? So it's quite funny and interesting to watch them being a bit like humans. I've got a slightly different story. When I was very, very young, one of my earliest memories, I went to the zoo with my nan, and we were at the orangutan cage, and I remember it really clearly. Like I said, one of my earliest clear memories. I must have been tiny, like 3, 4, and I'm stood there with my nan, and this little teenage orangutan comes running up to the front of the cage, and I'm there in amazement, like, oh, look, nan, oh, wow. And he starts masturbating furiously in front of me and my nan. And then another one come running up behind it and hit the other one over the head with the box, and they both ran off together. And the weirdest thing about the whole situation was my nan turned to me and she said, well, let that be a lesson to you. And I've no idea what she meant to this day. She's 90 odd now, so I can't really ask her. She doesn't remember it. But there you go. So that's why I'm interested in apes. And you think, people think they're like us. I'd never do that in front of you or nan. But anyway, it's a bit of a tangent there. Sorry about that. But they are fascinating. It is fascinating to look at those species that have similar traits to us. So imagine going back in time and meeting a Neanderthal. What was that like? Did they communicate? And again, there's been this sort of false paradigm of human evolution. You quite often see that photo or that drawing of like a monkey, a slightly more standy-uppy monkey, and then a Neanderthal or caveman, and then a person wearing a business suit. And it's not that linear. There are so many branches. There are so many different species that we might be related to, or that went off in a different direction, so we're indirectly related to or descended from. And Neanderthals would be one of those. People, I think, or I certainly used to think of it almost like a replacement system where it was Neanderthals, then us. But I think there was a period of time when Homo sapiens first kind of appeared in Africa, where there was about 6 or 7 other very similar species to us, knocking around. And again, what was that like? Was there a difficulty in interaction, but still a connection? Or was it completely hierarchical, and Homo sapiens were just much more advanced and just thought of those other species as animals as such? We just don't know. So yeah, Well, I don't know anyway. Maybe we do. Maybe we do. And that's going to be part of the journey. So, yeah, sorry for the waffle and the intro kind of episode, but I guess I wanted to just let people know what was coming in case they're tuning back in to listen to me talk to some of the other guests I've had on in the past. Like I said, I want to use this as a project of passion because that will drive me to keep going. And also from a selfish point of view, it would be very useful for me because at the end of it, if no one listens, other than my dad, because he's quite into this sort of stuff as well, so I would expect him to listen. But if no one listens, at the very least, I've had a bit of a journey of discovery and learning, which is quite a selfish reason to have a podcast, isn't it? I hope you enjoy it. I will try and make it as entertaining and enjoyable as is within my capabilities. But yeah, if you do, please like, please share. All that kind of stuff really helps. And, the more listens we get, the better guests we can get as well. So that's always helpful. But yeah, thank you ever so much. And like I said, if you need to get in touch, it's bunchofapes@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page. So check that one out. It's just Bunch of Apes. I'm trying to think. There's Twitter. We're on the Twitterer as well. I think we had to put Bunch O Apes for that because Bunch of Apes was taken, which was quite annoying. But yeah. Oh, and also any experts in apes, more than welcome. I'd love to speak to someone who's worked with chimpanzees for a long time. Always fascinating. And possibly orangutans, just to, I guess, understand why that one felt the need to indulge in self-ownerism in front of me and my nan at such a young age. That really has scarred me quite horrifically. I can't watch porn with ginger men in as a result. That's not true. Sorry. There might be a few inappropriate subjects along the way. Again, for example, I asked Brianna a couple of questions that I think she might have thought were a little bit odd. But I'll leave you to listen to that one. Anyway, take care. Cheers.